Chapter 35. Still not talking? Dr. Healer asked, settling into his chair. He handed me a Coke. I said nothing. I hadn't said a word since he came out into the waiting room to get me. Hadn't said a word when he asked if I wanted a Coke, nor acknowledged him when he told me he was going to step out to get us both something to drink and would be right back. I just sat, sulkily, on his couch, slouched back into the cushions with my arms crossed and a scowl darkening my face. We sat in silence for a while. "Did you bring me that notebook?" "I still want to see your drawings," he said. I shook my head. "Chess?" I moved from my seat on the couch and sat across the chessboard from him. "You know," he said slowly, making his move on the chessboard, "I'm beginning to think something's upsetting you." He tipped his eyes toward me and grinned. "I read a book about human behavior once. That's what makes me so adept at recognizing when someone's upset." I didn't return a smile, just looked back down at the board and made my move. We played for a while in silence, me promising myself all the while that I wouldn't say anything, that I'd just go back to that friendly place of quiet and solitude that had cradled me in the hospital, just curl up into myself until I disappeared, never speak to anyone again. The problem was, it was so hard to be silent with Dr. Healer. He cared too much. He was too safe. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, and before I could do anything to stop it, a tear rolled down my cheek. "Jessica and I aren't friends anymore," I said. I rolled my eyes and swiped at my cheek angrily, and I don't even know why I'm crying about it. It's not like we ever really were friends anyway. It's so stupid. "How'd this come about?" he asked, abandoning the chess game and sitting back. "She finally decided you were too much of a loser to be your friend?" "No," I said. "Jessica would never say that." "So who did? Megan?" "No," I said. "Jenny?" "I haven't even seen Jenny since the first day of school." He said, nodding his head. He looked at the chessboard thoughtfully. "So you're the only one talking then, huh?" "She still wants to be friends," I added, "but I can't." "Because something happened," he said. I glanced at him sharply. He had crossed his arms and was running his forefinger over his bottom lip like he always does when he's ferreting out information on me. I sighed. "It has nothing to do with why I blew Jessica off." "Just a coincidence?" he said. I didn't answer, just shook my head and let the tears roll. "I just wanted to go away. I just want all the drama to stop. No one would believe me anyway," I whispered. "Nobody would care." Dr. Healer shifted, leaned forward in his chair, and leveled his eyes so they looked deeply into mine. "I would. On both counts." I believed him. If anyone would care about what happened at the party, about what happened with Troy, it was Dr. Healer. And holding it all in, what felt comforting just a week ago, suddenly felt heavy and almost physically painful. Next thing I knew, I found myself unbelievably talking. Like even the silence wasn't friendly to me anymore. I told Dr. Healer everything. He sat back in his chair and listened, his eyes growing more and more vivid, his body growing more tense as I talked. Together we called the police to report Troy's threat. They check into things, they said. There probably wasn't much of anything they could do, especially if you're not even positive it was a real gun, they said. But they didn't laugh at me for telling. They didn't say I deserved it. They didn't accuse me of lying. When my session was over, Dr. Healer walked me out to the waiting room where Mom sat alone reading a magazine. "Now, you need to tell your mom what happened," he said. Mom looked up startled. Her mouth made a small O shape as she looked from him to me. "And you're going to work your ass off to get better," he warned. "You don't get to just check out now. I won't let you. You've worked way too hard. You have more hard work ahead of you." But I didn't feel like working hard, and when I got home, all I could think about was flopping back on my bed and sleeping. I told Mom everything in the car, including Dad's threat on the side of the highway when she picked me up. She looked impassive, disinterested while I talked, and said nothing when I finished. But as soon as we got home, she called Dad. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, listening to Mom's voice ratchet up notch by notch as she talked, blaming him for knowing and not telling, for picking me up without calling her, for not being at home where he belonged in the first place. After a while, I heard the front door open, followed by Mom's murmurs again. I opened my door and peeked downstairs. Dad was standing in the entryway, his hands on his hips, his face lined with annoyance. I noticed he was in street clothes, which I found odd because it was workday, and Dad never left work before dark. But then I noticed some splotches of paint on his shirt and realized that he must have been at home today, painting Briley's apartment, making it theirs. I quietly closed my door and paced to the window. Briley was sitting in the car at the curb waiting for him. I heard my mother's anxious voice mumble again, heard him thunder back at her. What was I supposed to do? A pause, and then his voice again. Send her back to the damn psych ward, that's what I think. I don't give a shit what that shrink says about progress. And then I heard the front door slam. I paced to the window again and watched him get into the car with Briley and drive away. Not long after Dad left, I sensed movement around the door and opened one eye. Frankie stood leaning tentatively up against the doorframe. He looked somehow older, with his hair buzzed short and glistening with gel, and his button-down shirt buttoned loosely over an Abercrombie t-shirt and his factory-faded jeans. His face looked unnaturally smooth and innocent, and he had these permanent little pink patches over his cheeks that made him look constantly embarrassed. Maybe he was always embarrassed. Look at the life he had to deal with. Ever since Dad moved out, Frankie had pretty much gone to live with his best friend Mike. I'd overheard Mom telling Mike's mom that she needed some time to get things straight with her oldest, and sure appreciated Mike's family for taking Frankie in. I figured it was this time spent with Mike that accounted for Frankie's transformation. Mike's mom was one of those perfect moms who wouldn't ever have a kid with spiked hair, much less one who shot up a school. Frankie was a good kid. Even I could recognize that. Hey, he said. You okay? I nodded, sat up. Yeah, I'm okay. Just tired, I guess. Are they really going to send you back to the hospital? I rolled my eyes. Dad's just blowing off steam. He wants me out of his hair. Do you need to go back? I mean, are you crazy or something? I almost laughed. In fact, I did chuckle a little, which made my head ache. I shook my head no. I wasn't crazy, at least I didn't think I was. They're just upset right now, I said. They'll get over it. Well, if you go, he started, and then stopped. He picked up my bedspread with chewed fingernails. If you go, I'll write to you, he said. I wanted to hug him, console him, tell him it wouldn't be necessary because there was no way I was going to go to some stupid psych ward, that I'd just stay away from Dad and he'd eventually calm down. I wanted to tell him our family would be repaired, would be better even. But I didn't say any of those things. I didn't say anything at all because somehow saying nothing seemed more humane than giving him all these reassurances. After all, how was I supposed to know anything at all? He brightened suddenly. Dad's getting me a four-wheeler, he said excitedly. He told me on the phone last night. And he's going to take me out and show me how to ride it. Isn't that awesome? That's awesome, I said with as much conviction as I could muster. It was cool to see Frankie smile and get excited again, even if I didn't believe for a minute that Dad was going to buy him anything. That would be so dad-like. And we both knew that our dad was totally not dad-like. You can write it too, he said, if, you come over to Dad's sometime. Thanks, that'd be fun. He sat around some more, looking uncomfortable the way boys do when they're sitting somewhere under extreme duress. If I were a good sister, I would have told him to go ahead and do something more fun. But I didn't mind sitting there with him. He radiated something that made me feel good inside. Hopeful. But pretty soon he got up. Well, I gotta get to Mike's. We're going to church tonight. He ducked his head as if church was embarrassing. He walked toward the door. Well, see ya, he said awkwardly, and he was gone. I sank back into my pillows and watched the horses on my wallpaper go nowhere. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine myself on one of them again, the way I used to do when I was little, but I couldn't see it. All I could see were the horses bucking me off time and again, dumping me on my butt on the hard ground. They had faces, too. Dad's, Mr. Angerson's, Troy's, Nick's, mine. After a while, I rolled to my back and stared up at the ceiling, realizing at once that there was something I had to do. I couldn't change the past, but if I were ever to feel whole again, I would have to say goodbye to it. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow is the day. Chapter 36. Even though I'd never been to Nick's grave, I knew exactly where it was. For one thing, it was on the news about every 10 seconds for the first 2 months after the shooting. For another, I'd heard enough people talking about it to get a pretty good idea. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here today. Who would I tell? Mom? She'd cry, forbid me, probably follow me, scream at me out the open driver's side window. Dad? Well, we weren't exactly on speaking terms. Dr. Healer? I would have, but I didn't exactly know I was going to do this the last time I saw him. I probably should have. Dr. Healer probably would have driven me, and right now my leg wouldn't hurt so much from walking all this way. My friends? Well, I had kind of kicked all of them out of my life, one way or another. I walked down a few rows of neatly kept graves with polished new headstones and unweathered bouquets, and found it between his grandfather Elmer and his Aunt Maisie, both of whom I'd heard of, but neither of whom I'd ever met. I stood and stared for a minute. The wind, which had only begun to shake off the winter, played around my ankles and made me shiver. It all felt right, my desperation, my chest aching from exertion, the chill, the wind, the gray. This was how graves were supposed to be, right? It's how they always were in the movies anyway. Cold, murky. Did the sun ever shine when you visited the eternal resting place of someone you loved? I doubted it. Nick's grave gleamed just like those around it, the light of the overcast sky playing great shadows across the words. Still, I could read them. Nicholas Anthony LaVille, 1990 to 2008. Beloved son. The words beloved son took me by surprise. It was small, italicized, almost hiding in the grass, as if an apology. I thought about his mom. Of course I'd seen her on TV, but it never seemed like the real woman. I knew her as Ma, just as Nick had called her, and she was always so laid back and nice to me. Always sort of in the background, intent to let Nick and me do our own thing. Never suffocating, never issuing edicts about proper behavior. Just cool. I liked her. I often thought of her as my mother-in-law, enjoyed the fantasy. Of course Ma would have wanted Nick remembered as a beloved son. Of course she'd do it in the most laid-back way possible, whispering it to him in tiny letters on his headstone. Just a whisper. You were beloved son. You were my beloved. Even after all of this, I still remember the beloved you. I can't forget. There was a bouquet of plastic blue roses sticking up from a built-in metal vase at the top of the headstone. I bent and touched one of the brittle petals, wondering if Nick would have been the type to want flowers on his grave. And then I was taken aback that I had never bothered to know that about him. 3 years together, and I'd never bothered to ask him if he liked flowers, if his favorites were roses, if he found the unnatural color of blue on plastic roses to be absurd. And suddenly that felt like a great tragedy in itself, mine not knowing. I lowered myself to my knees, my legs screaming under me. I reached out with my forefinger and traced Nick's name. Nicholas. I smirked, remembering how I teased him about his name. Nicholas, I had sung, dodging around the corner between the kitchen and the dining room, holding the framed photo I just snatched off the fireplace mantel in my hands. Oh, Nicholas, come here, Nicholas. You're going to regret it, he said, from somewhere in the living room. There was a smile in his voice, and even though I was teasing him over a given name that he truly hated being called, I knew he wanted to catch me, not to punish me, but to be playful. When I get my hands on you, he jumped around the corner with an aha! I squealed and ran, laughing through the kitchen and up the stairs toward the bathroom. Nicholas, Nicholas, Nicholas! I yelled through my laughter. I could hear him laughing and grunting behind me just on my tail. Nicholas Anthony! That's it, he cried, lunging for me and catching me around the waist just short of the bathroom. You're gonna pay. He'd knocked me to the floor and flopped on top of me, tickling me until I cried. Seems so long ago now.